We are coming on the air with breaking news. 4 American citizens detained in Russia have just been released as part of a prisoner swap involving multiple nations. Among those now free, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and Marine veteran Paul Whelan. I want to show you now a live look at an airport in Turkey where the exchange is believed to be taking place. Journalist Alsu Kurmasheva and Vladimir Karamurza, a pro-democracy advocate, have also been released. That is that runway in Turkey there. Evan Gershkovich, remember, had been sentenced to 16 years in prison, charged with espionage. He's been held in Russia since March of 2023 in a case denounced by the U.S. government as a sham. Paul Whelan was also serving a 16-year sentence for spying and spent more than 5 years behind bars. This is a significant moment now for the American government, obviously for these American citizens who are now on their way back to the United States. And it is historic, believed to be perhaps the biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War. I want to get to Gabe Gutierrez, who's following it all. And Gabe, walk us through some of the details of how we got here and what is next.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. Some of these details are just breaking right now. And as you said, the Biden administration says that this is the largest such prisoner exchange involving the number of individuals since the Cold War, and potentially the largest, as far as officials here know, ever in terms of how many countries are involved. Now, Hallie, let me walk you through it. Those countries involved, of course, the U.S., Russia, Germany, Norway, Slovenia, and Poland. And you mentioned we have been waiting to hear if these high-profile Americans, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, were part of this prisoner swap, and we're now told that they are. Now, we also understand that at some point this morning, President Biden is expected to meet with the families of those prisoners who were released here at the White House. Now, the details that we're also learning from senior administration officials are dramatic. This was something that had been in the works for a long time, and the Biden administration has repeatedly said that its one of its priorities is bringing home the families of those that are wrongfully detained around the world. Since 2021, when the president took office, they've been able to secure the release of around 70 individuals as well. But in this particular case, there had been several hang-ups. Hallie, as you know, Paul Whelan had been expected to be part of a previous prisoner exchange involving WNBA star Brittany Griner. He was not included in that exchange. He is in this one. And we understand that the president was speaking directly with the German chancellor, who was involved in this exchange, because one of the high-profile prisoners given back to Russia is a man named Vadim Gershkovich. Now, he, of course, was convicted of murder in Germany for murdering a Russian dissident, and that apparently was a huge key to this prisoner exchange. It is something that the Russians absolutely needed. Now, we're told by senior administration officials that President Biden was speaking with the German chancellor at one point, many times by phone, but at one point he met with the chancellor, and Chancellor Scholz responded to the president by saying, "For you, I will do this." So, Hallie, significant in that apparently the Germans, at least according to this senior administration official, went through with this prisoner swap at the direct request of President Biden. And here at the White House, this is being seen as a major foreign policy win. Officials here are also cautioning, though, that this should not be interpreted as any sort of shift in the terms of U.S. policy towards Russia. This is a very transactional in nature, of course, and it was a tough call to be able to trade this suspect, that was being held in Germany, as well as others, for these four Americans, actually 3 U.S. citizens and 1 legal permanent resident. Hallie.
Gabe, the other piece of this is the expectation that we may hear from President Biden later on, as a senior administration official, I believe, suggested that the day that the president withdrew himself from the 2024 presidential race, he was just literally minutes before working on securing the release of Evan Gershkovich, of Paul Whelan, and the others.
Certainly. Just about an hour before, according to the senior administration official, President Biden was speaking with Slovenian officials that same day that he announced that he would no longer stay in the race for president. So we are expecting at some point within a short order to get some sort of written statement from the president. It is possible, especially in these types of situations before, that he has addressed the American people. And again, Hallie, this is something the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, as you know, has said that officials here at the White House has been working around the clock in order to get this done. Now, Hallie, this is something that will be difficult to hear for the families of some Americans that are still detained in Russia. For example, Mark Fogel, he was a history teacher in Moscow, was returning to Moscow and allegedly was found with cannabis. He is considered being held wrongfully detained in Russia, and he is not part of this prisoner exchange. The White House officials were asked why, and as often happens in these types of prisoner swaps, the Russians were apparently not willing to give him up. And according to senior administration officials, sometimes they say you have to make tough decisions. But in their view, they say that this prisoner swap was worth it. Again, 3 U.S. citizens, 1 legal permanent resident, and also 12 German nationals will be returning to Germany. And about half dozen Russians will be heading back to Russia. And as we understand it, that prisoner swap, according to Turkish officials, is underway now in an airport in Ankara, Turkey. Hallie?
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. Let me go to Keir Simmons now, our chief international correspondent. And Keir, you heard Gabe lay it out there. This is being messaged not as a breakthrough diplomatically for U.S.-Russian relations, but it is obviously a hugely significant moment for the Gershkovich family, for the Whelan family, and for others.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen something as dramatic as this since the Cold War, and I think the pictures that we will see in the hours ahead will be quite extraordinary and will echo that period in time and tell us something about the time we're living in. But, you know, Hallie, let's just take a moment to think about the fact that a number of families are breathing out right now, and a number of our colleagues at the Wall Street Journal are breathing out right now with this news that they are now receiving that their colleague, Evan Gershkovich, who was in a Russian jail for more than a year, is now finally free. We saw him in those Moscow courtrooms, and he seemed to be holding up. He seemed to be looking strong. But this is going to be very, very personal for a number of people in our industry. In the Wall Street Journal, with a simple headline now, just posted, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich is free. Imagine being the journalists who were writing that headline just in the past few minutes. So a really dramatic moment, and there will be lots more to come, Hallie.
And Keir, to say there are a lot of moving pieces in this swap is an understatement. We're talking about more than 20 individuals. We're talking about a half dozen nations having to choreograph this to the minute.
That's right, and a statement from the Turkish government there in Ankara suggesting that there are 26. Now, we don't know the details, so we have to be cautious here. But up until now, Russia has insisted on 1 for 1, if you like. So one prisoner, one Russian prisoner for somebody being held inside of Russia. And I think it's unlikely that they will have wavered from that. And that is one of the reasons why you're seeing this highly complex dance, if you like, with multiple planes arriving. I'm just looking down now to read what the Turkish government has said, a total of 7 aircraft, including 2 from the United States and 1 each from Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway and Russia as part of the prisoner exchange operation. According to Turkey, they say 10 prisoners, including 2 minors, were relocated to Russia, 13 prisoners to Germany, and 3 prisoners to the United States. And again, we know now, and you can see that headline from the Wall Street Journal, that Evan Gershkovich is one of those, Paul Whelan. There's also Alsu Kamesheva and Vladimir Karamusa. Both of them, we think now, are free. We should just pause for a moment, though, Hallie, to say, and when you were mentioning it earlier before that special report, Mark Fogel and Kesnia Karolina, she's the ballet dancer, dual Russian-American citizen who was arrested recently in Russia. They do not appear to be included in this. And so inevitably there will be, and rightly, there will be questions about how come they aren't there when so many are there. And in fact, in the case of Paul Whelan, when Brittany Griner was released, he was not released, and that upset his family very much. These are such difficult moments for so many people, for the families who are learning that their loved ones are free, and also for the families who are finding out that their loved ones are not free. And then there is also, there's going to be a political question. I mean, you were talking earlier about Vadim Krasikov. This is a Russian security intelligence officer who is in jail, or was in jail in Germany for murder, for the assassination of someone in a park. And many in the US government will be concerned by the idea of exchanging American prisoners, who the American government is clear were wrongfully detained, with somebody who was convicted for murder. And that's just one example. I think you'll hear more of it. There are going to be other stories in this too, I suspect, because there are so many people involved, and that's going to emerge in the coming hours.
Yeah. Keir, I'm going to ask you to stand by for a second. I want to bring in Michael McFaul, our NBC News International Affairs analyst. Ambassador, it's good to have you on. Talk through now, and I should note for folks, in about 25 minutes, we do expect to hear from President Biden himself from the White House at this significant moment. Ambassador, why now for Vladimir Putin? There was immense pressure on him to free Evan Gershkovich after that journalist was wrongfully detained. Obviously, the Whelan family has been pushing for this for years. Talk to us about the timing.
Honestly, I don't understand the timing. I want to be clear about that. We're all just speculating. Had you asked me 2 days ago, would this swap occur? I would have said no, Putin was going to wait until after he knew who the president was. And especially if it was President Trump, he would have handed him this gift. So I think it's a really interesting question. Why now? What I do know, I've talked to folks, including people who are getting released and government officials. This is, I think, the most historic, complex swap of prisoners. I want to say alleged prisoners, because many of the people being held are not really criminals. But I think it's the biggest one in history, and we should celebrate. This is a fantastic achievement of diplomacy. Whether or not you believe we should be in these deals or not, that will be a debate, a political debate we have. I think the Biden administration leaned to do the right thing, but the fact that they pulled it off is extraordinary. If you think about all those planes you just reported, we're talking about several countries, multiple people, including Russian opposition figures. That's very important. That has not happened recently.
So I hear you on the question marks here as to the timing, considering that we're about to hit, of course, a presidential election here in the United States. When you talk about some of the individuals who have been released from the Russian side of it, Keir has mentioned, Gabe has mentioned, how do you see that playing into this?
Well, first of all, 3 of them are my personal friends. So this is a great day of joy for them and their family, including some of their family. I hope will be with the president very shortly. And one of them, and I'm just speculating, right? We don't know the details, but one of them, Volodya Karamurza, who has been released, his family lives in the Washington area. He's been a resident, as you rightly reported, for many years here in the United States. His health was allegedly failing. So maybe that's another one of the reasons why they decided to do this now, not have him die in jail when obviously something like this couldn't have happened. The other thing I would just say is I think it's very unusual that part of it are these opposition figures, right? Ilya Yashin is another one, a key Russian opposition leader, close to Alexei Navalny, close to murdered opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, Oleg Orlov, one of the key human rights leader. That's something different. Usually those kinds of people are not involved in these kinds of swaps.
Ambassador, I'm going to ask you to stand by for just a moment, and thank you for your expertise. I want to go back to our senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez, who is live for us from the North Lawn. And Gabe, in about 20 minutes, we will hear from President Biden. Any sense yet of what he may say, what he may share about how the swap came together?
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. We are getting those first details of when exactly President Biden will speak to the nation. As we understand it, yes, at noon Eastern time. Now, we do understand from senior administration officials that he had been meeting this morning with family members of those who were involved in this prisoner swap. So we expect to hear from the president, perhaps, of what that conversation entailed, but also the lengthy process that got us here, Hallie. As you know, national security officials have always said that these types of negotiations are exceedingly difficult. And we heard from one senior administration official earlier this morning, saying that one event that really put a lot of doubt into whether this prisoner swap will come to fruition was the death earlier this year of Alexei Navalny, that senior administration official, saying that really took the wind out of the sails of these negotiations. But National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan instructed his team to keep going. And here we are about 6 months after that. Russian President Vladimir Putin had signaled a willingness to continue with negotiations in an interview earlier this year, but it was an open question whether he would follow through on that. There were a lot of questions as well whether the Germans would be willing to give up that prisoner, that assassin. And as we heard from administration officials today, it was the direct involvement, according to them, of President Biden that got this over the finish line, Hallie.
And you are already hearing administration officials touting, essentially, including a senior administration official, Gabe, that this is a result, directly they see it, of President Biden's leadership, of his relationships on the world stage.
Yeah, that's right. And look, they mentioned that it was President Biden's leadership on the world stage, but also his direct involvement with the German chancellor. Now, the administration is also thanking Turkey for logistical support here. And Hallie, as we were describing, and Ambassador McFaul was talking about, the sheer massive nature of this prisoner swap involving so many countries, very complicated. And national security officials say that, look, these types of negotiations, sometimes you take several steps, take one step forward and you take several steps back. It had been underway for quite some time. And the Biden administration is also touting that since the beginning of the administration, since he took office, there have been around 70 individuals around the world that the administration believed were wrongly detained that have returned now to the United States. Now, certainly,
Gabe,
as you heard...
Let me just jump in here, friend, because as you've been speaking, we've gotten that statement now from President Biden. So this is a statement. I'm going to let you check your email because I'm going to read part of it here as well. Again, we expect to hear from him in person, on camera, in just about, looking at our clock here, 18 minutes or so. But in the meantime, the president has put out a statement about the release of these Americans detained in Russia, saying that the deal that secured their freedom was a feat of diplomacy, in the president's word. All told, he said they've negotiated the release of 16 people from Russia, including 5 Germans, 7 Russian citizens, some of whom, he says, have been unjustly held for years. The president then nods to the allies who were involved in this prisoner swap. And again, as Gabe has just laid out, there were a number of other nations, Germany, Slovenia, et cetera, involved in this, including Norway and Turkey, with President Biden saying this is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world whom you can trust and depend on. Our alliances make America safer. He also nods to the idea that there are other Americans, of course, who are being held in other nations around the world, saying he will not stop working until every American wrongfully detained is reunited. He says, we see you, to those families. We are with you. Let me bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, who's been following this closely. And Andrea, as we are hearing now from President Biden in this statement, we expect to see him in person. We are also getting new details on the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, and his involvement in this, what has been a painstaking process over the course of years, not just months and weeks.
Exactly. Well, this has been a very, as you point out, a painstaking process, widespread diplomacy. There were several breakthroughs, one of which was with the German chancellor when he came here in February. It was the first time in several years that he had been willing to consider trading the assassin, the FSB assassin in a Berlin prison who had killed 2 people in Berlin, trading him back to Russia if other things could be worked out. They wanted some assets of Germany that could be added to this mix. And this was in February at an Oval Office meeting. It was the first hint that that trade might be possible. There had been efforts to get Kazakov in trade earlier in terms of Brittany Griner, and that meant that they wouldn't have had to trade Victor Bout, or they could have thrown the arms dealer that was in an American prison, Victor Bout, into the mix and gotten Paul Whelan. Unfortunately, the U.S. was not been able to persuade Germany to give up this very prized prisoner who had killed people in the middle of Berlin in broad daylight. And so this Russian arms dealer, very valuable to Vladimir Putin, had been traded instead, and only Brittany Griner came out, leaving Paul Whelan, who had already been in prison, an American businessman, a former Marine, for more than 4 years. Now Paul Whelan is part of this deal, and Evan Gershkovich, of course, the American journalist, Wall Street Journal journalist who had been in prison for more than a year. Key to all of this was the acceleration of his trial and sentencing the second week in July. At the time, very unusual, but that was the key to making it possible to get this. This is the largest deal since the Cold War, and more countries involved since the Cold War.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you to stand by for just 1 second. I want to go back to Keir Simmons, our chief international correspondent, because, Keir, we have been seeing some of these Wall Street Journal journalists, colleagues of Evan Gershkovich, posting, for example, online about this moment in the newsroom for the Journal when this was announced. And we're now hearing, I understand, from the editor-in-chief?
Yeah, that's right. So we just heard, as you say, from the president, but now we're hearing from the Wall Street Journal editor-in-chief, Emma Tucker, and her statement is heartfelt and emotional. She just begins by simply saying, Evan is free and on his way home. She says he was released today in a multilateral prisoner exchange that took place in Ankara, along with Paul Whelan and Alsu Kameshova, among others. We are overwhelmed with relief and elated for Evan and his family, as well as for the others who were released. She goes on to condemn, in the strongest terms, she says, Vladimir Putin's regime in Russia, which orchestrated Evan's 491-day wrongful imprisonment based on sham accusations and a fake trial. Then later, and this is interesting, given the conversation that we've just been having, she thanks the U.S. government, numerous governments around the world, and says that they have particular gratitude to Germany, as well as other global news media organizations, for standing in solidarity with Evan. And then, quite touchingly, towards the end of the statement, she has some special appreciation and recognition, she says, for Evan's mother, Ella, his father, Mikhail, and his sister, Danielle, and her husband, Anthony, who've been steadfast partners throughout this unthinkable ordeal. Their unwavering strength, positivity, and resolve will continue to serve as an inspiration. As you say, Evan Gershkovich was known by many because he's a journalist, and he's the kind of person that we rub shoulders with, and many of our colleagues at NBC News knew him, and those scenes in the Wall Street Journal, I think, will be repeated, perhaps not with quite the same emotion, in other newsrooms around the world and across the US, because this is a moment where we are able to say that Evan Gershkovich is finally free.
Yeah. Incredibly significant here. August 1st, he has been imprisoned, of course, since the spring of 2023. Keir, let me ask you to stand by. I want to bring in Rob D'Amico, former FBI hostage negotiator who's been involved with previous exchanges. He's joining us now. And Rob, we've talked about this. We've shown that live shot of that airport in Turkey where this prisoner exchange is believed to have taken place. There is an immense amount of choreography that is quite detailed and quite involved that has to take place for a moment like this. Talk us through what must have happened, in your view, behind the scenes to get to this point.
I can only imagine. I conducted one in Afghanistan with the Haqqanis, where they were releasing 2 of the prisoners, an Australian American. We were releasing 3 Haqqanis, and it was an up and down. It was a roller coaster. It started to happen. I remember one time we were actually walking the Haqqanis out to the tarmac, and we had to recall them, and the jet had to fly back off. So this probably went back and forth where it was so close, and then something broke down and it didn't happen. So I'm sure on the backside of this, the roller coaster that the government officials were on was very, very immense. You don't tell the families that because it's too hard to go up and down. You only tell them when you really have good news. So that's really the tough part. But this exchange, like I said, is historic in the amount of everyone coming together and actually doing it and making it happen.
Rob, thank you. Let me sneak in our senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez, at the White House, because, Gabe, we're learning more now about what is next for these individuals as they are on their way back to the U.S.
Yeah, Hallie, this will be a very difficult process, of course, for them and anyone who has been wrongfully detained really around the world. I can remember last year I covered the return of 6 American citizens who had been held in Iran, who were returned to the U.S. as part of an exchange, and $6 billion in frozen Iranian assets were unfrozen. It was controversial at the time. Those American citizens who were wrongfully detained. They returned here to the U.S. and they were taken to an Army Medical Center in San Antonio. And typically that is where prisoners returning from overseas go to be reintegrated, not just to look at their physical scars, but also mental scars, psychological evaluation, a process that could take weeks, months, and unfortunately can take perhaps years for some of these individuals. But one of their first steps is to go to this facility in San Antonio to help be reintegrated into American life. But as I was saying earlier, Hallie, the White House really looking this as a foreign policy win, something that they have been working for so long, and now the return of these Americans. We expect to hear from the president in a short time, Hallie.
Have we heard from any of the family members yet, Gabe? Obviously, just incredibly emotional for them. I spoke with one of Paul Whelan's siblings as this process was unfolding over the course of the last couple of years. This has been gut-wrenching for them in so many ways.
Certainly. We have not heard directly from any of the family members, at least that I can see. But, again, we do expect to hear from the president. And as we understand it, he was meeting with some of those family members here in the Oval Office at the White House this morning. Unclear if any of those family members might speak to reporters here at the White House. But, again, we are expecting to hear from the president at noon Eastern time. And then shortly after that, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, is also expected to brief reporters. Howard.
More details to come from that. Gabe, thank you. Let me go back to former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, who's an NBC News international affairs analyst. Ambassador, it sounds as though the White House administration officials are trying to tamp down any expectation that this suggests a massive diplomatic breakthrough with Russia. Obviously, the relationship between the U.S. and Russia is at one of its lower points here. Is that a fair assessment? Is that how you see it?
100%. And those that are claiming that this is some new steps towards rapprochement or détente or the beginning of negotiations on Ukraine, I see it absolutely the opposite way. This is, in the old days, there was linkage between success here might help us there. That is not the case in my understanding of what's going on here. And we should just celebrate this fantastic diplomatic achievement. You know, I was a diplomat in Russia. I worked at the White House on Russia. You don't get many days where you get to put points on the board, where you get to do wins. This is a fantastic win. We're getting out really good people, Americans and the Russians. Thank you for keep talking about the Russians, by the way. These are some of the bravest people I know. Volodya Karmuzha, Ilya Yashin, Oleg Orlov. These are people who have been fighting Putin's Russia, and it is a fantastic day that they will be free today as well.
The president, in his statement, Ambassador, and again, we expect to hear from him in just about, looking at the clock, just about 7 minutes from now. He is expected to speak at noon Eastern time here in Washington from the White House. But one of the things he nods to in his statement is the idea that there are, of course, other Americans who are still wrongfully detained, who are still being held by other nations. And he says we are committed, his administration, to continuing to work to secure their release. Talk to us now about Mark Fogel. Keir Simmons, who you know, touched on this earlier in our special reporting here. But Fogel has not been declared officially wrongfully detained. And that could be significant as it relates to the push to try to get him freed, correct?
Possibly. And just to be clear, I used to know Mark. When I was the ambassador, he was my son's high school teacher. He's a fantastic guy. He was a teacher for all of our diplomats and our military officers at the embassy. I consider him part of our team. We were together watching the Olympics in Sochi, the Sochi Olympics. I remember vividly, and it breaks my heart that he's not on this list. And I know it breaks the heart of everybody who knew Mark. He is a great American, and I don't know why he was not on the list. I know for a fact, having talked to very senior administration officials, that they have been working on his case, that has been part of the negotiations, and it just looks like he didn't make the cut for this particular trade. So thank you for remembering him, and I know that the Biden administration will continue to work to try to seek his release. And as the president rightly said, I just know Mark personally, and I know his story, and I know his family. But there are many Americans still all over the world, and we have to keep fighting. I know it's controversial, and I'm waiting for the political backlash to say, why are we trading criminals for innocent people? These are tough decisions. I was part of the swap back in 2010 when we gave away allegedly 10 Russians for four alleged spies inside Russia, and we were criticized for an asymmetric swap. With these tough decisions, you just have to think, are we better off with these people free or not? And there's no question in my mind, we're better off with the Americans free and with the 3 Russians I know personally free, that we are much better off, the United States and the entire free world.
Ambassador McFaul, thank you. We just showed you a live shot there of that airport in Turkey where this prisoner exchange is believed to have taken place. We understand that these 4 individuals we've been talking about here, of course, Evan Gershkovich, Paul Whelan among them, are headed back to the United States, if not already, in fact, in the air. I want to bring back in Rob D'Amico because Rob is somebody who has worked on negotiations like these for prisoner exchanges. What must it be like on that plane?
Oh, I can't. I've talked to a few hostages get released, and some of it's very surreal because they've been in captivity. Paul's been in, over 5 years for this day to come. They thought about it, and they're overwhelmed. And it's everyone wants to talk to him. But as he talked about the process that they're going to go through to reintegrate, psychologists and doctors are going to look at it medically. But it's a whole process of coming back. And it takes years. I work, as you know, advisor for the Foley Foundation that works with the families. And if they have their Bringing American Home report that just came out that talks about them, but it also interviews families after they get released and why they're in captivity. And it talks about this, the challenges of both the families and the victims who get released and how many years it takes they'll never get over it, but just to get back into the norm and they'll appreciate the little things that they've never had before is what I found.
And what is the processing back to quote unquote normal life like once they do land in San Antonio? Having spoken with Trevor Reed, who was previously detained and released, it is a long process at times and sometimes a difficult one.
It is. We prepared for people being released in Afghanistan all the time. And talking to the psychologist, part of it is just giving them choices. They haven't had choices in so long, what they eat, but you don't give them too many. You just make it between 1 and 2 choices. At least they're starting to dictate for themselves what they do when they want to go use the restroom and when they want to do this. You have to also protect them from everyone wanting to look and talk to them because it's just too overwhelming. So the doctors will talk to them and see how they feel and who they're willing to talk to. Maybe, again, get them on the phone with family members, but a whole family group right away could be overwhelming. But that's what the doctors are going to do, depending on each victim takes it differently and is prepared for it.
Rob, thank you. I'll ask you to stand by, and I want to bring in our foreign correspondent, Josh Letterman, who's live for us overseas following these developments. And Josh, we're just getting some new details, some new reporting from a senior administration official on the timeline of how this went down. Specifically, that while these discussions had been going on for the better part of the last 2 years, it was only in the last 2 weeks that things moved very quickly. It was the CIA that largely led the process. And only on Tuesday were these family members invited to the White House. It doesn't sound like they were told specifics, of course. But presumably they could put 2 and 2 together here.
That's right, Hallie. And of course, the administration is going to want to be as careful as they possibly can, because until these individuals were actually on a plane out of Russian airspace and safely in a third country, in this case, Turkey, you never know what could go wrong at the last minute. And that is the reason why the Biden administration was so careful with the timing of putting out information throughout the day today. Why, frankly, the Wall Street Journal, if you notice, they didn't put anything on their own website throughout the day today until it was confirmed that Evan Gershkovich was safely out of Russia because of the chance that something could go wrong at the last minute. But we are learning now from this senior administration official who's spoken to our NBC News colleague, Carol Lee, about some of the behind-the-scenes machinations that led to this. That official saying that the negotiations really started 2 years ago, right around the time when Brittany Griner was released. And of course, at that time, Paul Whelan, unfortunately, was left behind. And so that was the point in time when they started talking with Russia using kind of the same diplomatic channels that they had used to secure that prisoner swap about another prisoner swap. But according to this official, it was only in the last 2 weeks or so that they were really able to finalize a deal with a new proposal sent by the Biden administration to the Russian government at the end of June after President Biden signed off on it. So these are kind of the indications of just how hard fought and potentially precarious this was right up until the final minute, Hallie.
And I just want to note for folks, we're coming up here on noon Eastern time. That is when we expect to see President Biden address the nation. We will see if he is precisely on time. We're obviously going to bring you those remarks the second that they happen. We are standing by for that. But Josh, as we're talking about how this came together, this historic prisoner swap, again, U.S. officials say we haven't seen something like this since the Cold War, involving more than 20 people, involving 7 nations. One of the interesting pieces of this, according to Carol's reporting from a senior administration official, is the role of Alexei Navalny, that he was part of the discussion, of course, before his death earlier this year, and that obviously once he died, there was a moment of reset, if you will. Talk us through that piece of it.
Yeah, that's right, because the administration had for a long time been looking at some type of a grand bargain, right? The idea that there would be multiple people on each side potentially involved in a swap. Now, Alexei Navalny was one of the most high-profile people in Russian prisons, certainly in terms of the international stage. And so when the news broke about his death, that really dealt a serious blow to the prospects that there could be some type of broader deal struck to try to get some of these other Americans detained in Russia out. But according to this senior administration official, again, who spoke to Carol Lee, it was after the Navalny death broke that the U.S. government essentially went back to the Russians and said, OK, can we regroup here? Can we try to keep this on track? Really, at the same time that the world was reeling from the news that the most prominent Russian opposition figure known to the public had just died under extremely mysterious circumstances while in Russian custody, Hallie.
Josh, I'm going to ask you to stand by for a second. Let me bring in White House correspondent Ali Rafa, who is outside the White House following the latest developments. And Ali, we expect to see President Biden any minute, moments after getting, of course, that what we call paper statement from him, his sort of words, if not him on camera, in which he talks about this being a feat of diplomacy and says that his administration will continue to work to secure the release of other Americans who are detained.
Yeah, Hallie, and you and I have heard the president for years now tout his foreign policy chops, talk about his decades-long relationships and alliances with world leaders. And senior administration officials are saying that the success of this prisoner swap is credited to those long-standing relationships and those alliances, specifically with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, a senior administration official saying that they were credited and that relationship was credited for this coming to fruition. Also saying that in recent weeks, remember, it was almost 2 weeks ago now that the president made that unprecedented announcement to drop out of the 2024 election. And a senior administration official is saying that literally just the hour before that announcement was made, that the president was on the phone with his Slovenian counterpart, urging them to make these final arrangements to get this deal across the finish line. Also saying that Germany was key to this deal because, of course, one of the prisoners Russia is interested in getting back is in German custody. And so this the senior administration official is saying that this is all due to the direct engagement of the president and those long-standing alliances. But we know that these conversations had been happening for years now. And when asked about this, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had repeatedly said publicly, adding this caveat, saying that this is an extremely difficult process, that it requires so many different pieces of a puzzle to work perfectly together to come to fruition, and also saying that it could sometimes take years for it to be successful. And now we're seeing the fruitful results of that labor happening behind the scenes that we know was happening in intelligence channels between the U.S. and Russia. There was new hope in recent months after we heard Russian President Putin say publicly that he would be willing to engage in this prisoner swap. But as you heard Josh mentioned, there were concerns, especially in the wake of the Ukraine-Russia war, especially in the aftermath of the death of Alexei Navalny, how successful this could be, whether it was on the track to success and whether these Americans could be safely returned home. And of course, we expect the president to talk more about these communications and his work behind the scenes in just a few minutes when he addresses the nation from the state dining room of the White House. Hallie.
We're going to be watching for that. We will bring it to you live when it happens. We are also just getting into a statement now from the family of Paul Whelan, of course, who had been in prison for more than 5 years. It is a lengthy statement in which they thank profusely the people who helped bring Paul home, essentially, starting their statement simply, Paul Whelan is free. But they also talk about his reintegration into society. And they say that Whelan is not in a Russian labor colony any longer, but he is not home, pointing out that while he was wrongfully imprisoned, they say he lost his home, he lost his job. They go on to say, we are unsure how someone overcomes these losses and rejoins society after being a hostage. I want to bring in Pentagon correspondent Courtney Cubie, who can talk about that reintegration process. And as Whelan's family points out, Courtney, especially for somebody who's been held as long as he has, they are looking at a potentially difficult journey. Whelan's family talks about having spoken with other, freed hostages, people who have spoken with freed hostages about how their process returning to quote unquote normal life was. It is not an easy one, Court.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a process that's different for every single individual. Now, where it will start for most likely all 4 of these Americans who are coming home is in San Antonio, Texas, at a place called Brooke Army Medical Center. There, the U.S. military has a program that they call their post-isolation support activities. Because it's the military, it's an acronym. They call it PISA. It's what you and I, Hallie, might refer to as a reintegration period. Basically, they have an opportunity for several weeks to meet with counselors, psychologists, doctors, where they can talk about any injuries that they may have had during their time in detention, anything that they may have suffered from. They can address their medical, but they can also address the emotional reintegration that will take many of them. In many cases, it could take them months or even years to get back into the society here in the United States or wherever they ultimately decide to live. Now, keep in mind, this is the kind of thing that other people who have been held, whether it's in prisons by nations or even held by terror networks, have been brought back and gone through. And as I said, every single case is different because some people have to be taught again to sleep in a bed, for instance. If they have been held in a place where they haven't had a bed, they need to actually be reintegrated into being used to seeing sunlight in some cases. So it's a very different process for all. But the families are also brought in here, Hallie. They talk to them about how they can help support their loved one through this difficult process and how they can help ultimately bring them back into society. Now, this process here called PISA at San Antonio, according to officials who I've spoken with, this is considered really the best program in the world. It's something that the U.S. military has been able to perfect over time. U.S. military doctors are involved in it down there. And it's supposed to be a 2-week period, but it can last longer and they can offer follow-on services, again, depending on the severity of the case here, Hallie.
Courtney, thank you. Josh Letterman, let me go back to you here because one of the things that we've been talking about is the relationship between the U.S. and Russia. As we are taking a live look now, again, this is the airport in Turkey where it's believed this prisoner swap was happening. And again, these prisoners flown from a variety of countries to Turkey and then heading home at that point. We expect to hear from President Biden really any minute. We were supposed to hear from him about 7 minutes ago, so that is clearly running just a bit behind schedule. But Josh, as I bring you into the conversation here, there is a sort of broader geopolitical lens by which to look at this through.
There absolutely is, Hallie. And, I'm struck by the list of countries that are involved in this swap today. If you think about these European nations of Germany, Slovenia, Norway, and Poland, in addition to the United States, these are all countries that have been playing significant roles in supporting Ukraine in its war with Russia. And on the other end, we just learned in the last few minutes from the German government that Belarus was also involved in this trade, that there was a German who had been in custody in Belarus who will now be coming home to Germany. Belarus, the country that has probably been the most supportive of Russia in its war in Ukraine, actually allowed Russia to use its territory as kind of a staging ground for that invasion. And so I think what this speaks to really is the point that Ambassador McFaul was making before, which is that this issue of the prisoner swap is really in a silo. It is existing separate from these enormous tensions between Russia and the West that have been really thrust to the forefront by the war in Ukraine, the reinvigoration of NATO in response to that. And we should not anticipate, as a senior administration official has also been emphasizing, that this is going to signal some new breakthrough where these countries now have common ground and are able to join forces or lower tensions on a really geopolitical level. What it could potentially lead to, if there is a small piece of future-looking good news here, according to U.S. officials, is the possibility of further prisoner swaps in the future. That now that they have worked out a bit more of a rhythm with the Russian government for negotiating these things and working out these intelligence community channels, that they might be able to do further work to release some of the additional Americans still in Russian custody, such as Mark Fogel, that teacher who was detained on drug charges. Hallie.
Josh Letterman, thanks. Let me bring in NBC's Matt Bodner, our producer formerly based in Moscow, now in London. Matt, you know this country, you know Russia well. You know, of course, some of the individuals involved in this prisoner swap as well. Talk to us about what imprisonment looked like for some of them, particularly Paul Whelan, who was sentenced to 16 years, spent about 5 of them in a Russian penal colony.
Yeah, thank you, Hallie. I think a lot about what everyone has gone through on this, particularly Evan Gershkovich, because I do know him, but also Whelan. I remember very clearly the day that Whelan was detained in Moscow. It was concerning, I think, for all foreigners in Russia, but particularly, journalists. I know that Whelan was not a journalist, but looking at an American being very clearly framed for espionage in broad daylight in central Moscow doesn't exactly inspire confidence. And then you continue to see the situation sort of deteriorate over the next several years. That happened back in 2018. And so you still have like a 4 or 5 year period where you still have a pretty heavy Western media presence on the ground where the situation is just constantly getting worse. Now, as for what people going in detention are going through, I think that Whelan and Evan had analogous but different experiences. I think Whelan in his pretrial detention might have had a little bit more access. Though Gershkovich, of course, did have connection, particularly early on, with the outside world through letters and communication with his lawyers. But recently, that was not the case. Of course, Evan Gershkovich last week appeared in Yekaterinburg for the final hearing in his trial, where he was given the verdict in that 16-year sentence. In the lead up to that, since he moved from Moscow to Yekaterinburg for that trial a few months ago, he was mostly out of contact. There was a point in time in the past few weeks where no one could really say in any sort of really determined way where specifically he was being held, and then he appeared at that hearing with a shaved head. So you're watching from the outside and starting to get concerned because you have no real transparency into the situation. You could ask the Russian prison service for comment. They'll most likely not give you a comment. A very interesting thing that's been happening over the past 48 hours to illustrate this is, as it became apparent that there was movement of some type going on in Russia, reports from lawyers of opposition figures, even at one point Karamurza's lawyers and Whelan's lawyers, all saying that they were not exactly sure where their clients were, and that they were asking for that information and sometimes receiving responses from the prison service that this person is no longer here. So just trying to highlight how non-transparent this process is, and I think that the prisoners themselves don't really get a whole lot of information on what's going on. They do receive some solitary confinement. I would hazard a guess that Gershkovich's treatment in conditions in Moscow were better than they were in Yekaterinburg, but I suppose we'll hear soon enough.
Yeah, I suppose we will. Matt Bodner, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let me go back to Ali Rafa, our White House correspondent, who's following the latest developments with President Biden set to speak from the White House any minute now. We've been showing that live shot, of course, at that airport in Turkey, the epicenter, essentially, of this multi-nation prisoner swap. And Ali, one of the things that a senior administration official pointed out was that even on the day that President Biden withdrew himself from the 2024 presidential ticket, so the day he announced that he would not, in fact, run for re-election, he had been on the phone with the Slovenians, essentially, trying to get sort of the last pieces of this over the finish line, if you will, an indication of the way that there is a collision now between foreign policy, between domestic politics here at home, and a new response now from the person who is the front runner for the Democratic ticket to be the presidential nominee, and that's Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah, Hallie, and we knew that President Biden was going to shift to separate priorities after he made that unprecedented announcement to drop out of the 2024 race. Presumably, this was something that, as we know, has been long in the works, long discussed, but now having the time to make those calls, to engage in this diplomacy that got this deal across the finish line. And of course, you mentioned the now de facto Democratic nominee who President Biden passed the torch on to, Vice President Harris, now reacting reacting to news of this historic prisoner swap. In a post on X, she says, "Today we celebrate the release of Paul, Evan, Alsu, and Vladimir and others who were unjustly held in Russia. It gives me great comfort to know that their horrible ordeal is over and that they will soon be reunited with their families. POTUS and I will not stop working until every American who is wrongfully detained or held hostage is brought home." And that's a message that was echoed by President Biden himself in his statement in the aftermath of this news. He said at the end of that statement that we remember all those still wrongfully detained or held hostage around the world. And he said he reaffirms his pledge to their families. "We see you, we are with you, and we will never stop working to bring your loved ones home where they belong." Of course, a senior administration official earlier today credited the president's decades-long relationships and alliances with the world's leaders who were involved in getting this deal to come to fruition, even saying that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was specifically credited with getting this deal across the finish line after, of course, we know Russia was interested in having one of their prisoners that was being held in Germany released. And so that all came down to Germany's agreement to take part in this. And of course, we know that the president has long said that alliances are very important. That's something that he again reiterated in this statement from just a few minutes ago. And that's something we could expect him to talk about when he delivers these remarks to the nation in just any minute now, Hallie.
We expect it in probably less than 60 seconds. Allie, let me quickly turn to Josh Letterman, because Josh, while the president has had a huge spotlight on him, largely for political reasons over the past few weeks, now there is a very different kind of spotlight on the president and what he's about to say.
That's right. And certainly an opportunity for President Biden to try to show off a foreign policy success, just as his administration is under intense scrutiny from the Trump campaign. We're going to see President Biden talk really about the efforts over multiple years, we expect, to try to bring this to, and really making the point that his administration has not let off the gas on this. I believe the number is 70 that the White House is saying that of detained Americans that they have been able to bring home during the course of the Biden administration. And of course, we expect that Vice President Kamala Harris, who's also put out a statement praising this decision today, would characterize herself as someone who would be continuing that legacy to really try to bring home and prioritize the return of American citizens who are wrongfully detained overseas. But there are not a lot of moments when a U.S. president gets to take to the podium like this and announce something that is such positive news, that is really going to be seen as such a victory, clearly by the families of these previously detained American citizens. And so we expect to hear the president likely also praising the work of his diplomatic team, really U.S. diplomats who had to fan out across the globe to try to secure the participation of all of these other various countries involved in this extremely complex, multilateral deal to bring home these Americans, but of course to secure the release of Russian prisoners that was needed to be able to get Russia to agree to this deal, Hallie.
The White House and senior administration officials have emphasized the relationships that President Biden has, his ability, in their view, to lead on the world stage, to be able to get to a moment like this. But this may also be significant for the reasons that you lay out, Josh, for Vice President Kamala Harris, who is embarking now on what will be a 96-day sprint, roughly, to Election Day, and hoping, presumably, to show off some of her foreign policy chops as she is running, of course, for commander-in-chief.
That's exactly right. And I think one of the things that a lot of people are looking to hear from Vice President Harris as her campaign really starts to gel and pick up speed in the coming weeks is how much of the Biden national security team do you expect to keep on into a future President Harris term? Would this likely be a continuation of essentially the Biden national security apparatus, or does she have designs to do things a little bit differently, to bring in her own team members? Because clearly it has been President Biden, the former chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, someone who prizes himself as a real national security expert, who has been leading the charge on all of these issues in recent years, with Vice President Harris playing more of an ancillary role, particularly on some of these immigration and other international issues. And here we can see President Biden coming up to the podium right now. Let's listen in.
Josh, thank you. And he is, of course, surrounded by family members, you can see, of those now freed.
We got everybody? Well, good afternoon. And this is a very good afternoon. A very good afternoon. Today, we're bringing home Paul, Evan, also Vladimir. 3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder. All 4 have been imprisoned unjustly in Russia. Paul for nearly 6 years. Vladimir since 2022. Evan since March of 2023. And also since October of 2023. Russian authorities arrested them, convicted them in show trials, and sentenced them to long prison terms with absolutely no legitimate reason whatsoever, none. Paul, a former Marine, was in Russia for a wedding. Evan, a journalist with a Russian, in Russia, was in Russia, assigned by the Wall Street Journal. Also a journalist, was in Russia to see family. All 3 falsely accused of being spies. And Vladimir, who is a Russian citizen by birth and holds an American green card, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and was a pallbearer at my friend John McCain's funeral with me. He spoke out against Putin's regime, and for that he was convicted of treason. And now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free. Moments ago, the families and I were able to speak to them on the telephone from the Oval Office. They're out of Russia. Earlier today, they were flown to Turkey, and soon they'll be wheels up on their way home to see their families. This is an incredible relief for all the family members gathered here. It's a relief to the friends and colleagues all across the country who've been praying for this day for a long time. The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined the difficult, complex negotiations at my request. And I personally thank them all again. And I've thanked them personally, and I'll thank them again. All told, Russia has released 16 prisoners. 8 Russians who are being held in the West will be sent home as well. These 16 prisoners from Russia that Russia has released include 4 Americans, 5 Germans, 7 Russian citizens who are political prisoners in their own country. One of those Russians runs a human rights organization, Memorial, which won a Nobel Prize in 2022. Putin threw him in prison for voicing opposition to the war in Ukraine. 4 others work with Alexei Navalny, political opposition leader who died in Russia prison this year. Now they can live safely abroad and continue their work of advocating for democracy if they so choose. This deal would not have been made possible without our allies. Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey, they all stepped up, and they stood with us. They stood with us. And they made bold and brave decisions, released prisoners being held in their countries who are justifiably being held, and provided logistical support to get the Americans home. So for anyone who questions whether allies matter, they do. They matter. And today is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world. Friends you can trust, work with, and depend upon, especially on matters of great consequence and sensitivity like this. Our alliances make our people safer, and we began to see that again today. Let me say this. It says a lot about the United States that we work relentlessly to free Americans who are unjustly held around the world. It also says a lot about us that this deal includes the release of Russian political prisoners. They stood up for democracy and human rights. Their own leaders threw them in prison. The United States helped secure their release as well. That's who we are in the United States. We stand for freedom, for liberty, for justice, not only for our own people, but for others as well. And that's why all Americans can take pride in what we've achieved today. I want to thank everyone in my administration who helped make this happen. Our work did not start just on day one. It started before day one. During the transition, I instructed our national security team to dig into all the cases of hostages being wrongfully detained, which were inherently, well, we inherited them from the prior administration. I wanted to make sure we hit the ground running, and we did. As of today, my administration has brought home over 70 Americans who were wrongfully detained and held hostage abroad. many since before I took office. Additionally, I issued an executive order in 2022 authorizing penalties like sanctions and travel bans on those who hold Americans against their will. And my State Department has introduced new warnings for Americans about the risk of being wrongfully detained by a foreign government. Deals like this one come with tough calls, and there are never any guarantees. But there's nothing that matters more to me than protecting Americans at home and abroad. And so we'll continue to work for the release of all wrongfully detained Americans around the world. Let me end where I began, with Paul, Evan, and also Vladimir and their families. They never gave up hope. We can't imagine what they've been through, all of you. Matter of fact, this lady right here, I think, was living in the Oval Office with us for a while. All kidding aside, can't imagine their joy right now. They're home. Tomorrow's a big day. The 13th birthday of Miriam. Miriam, where are you? Come here. You all know we have a tradition in the Biden family. We sing happy birthday on any birthday. You ready? All of you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Miriam. Happy birthday to you. Remember, no serious guys till you're 30. God love you. She's Al Sue's daughter. Now she gets to celebrate with her mom. That's what this is all about. Families able to be together again, like they should have been all along. So I want to thank you again to everyone who did their part. In just a few hours, we'll welcome home our fellow Americans. We're looking forward to that. God willing, we're going to be out at Andrews and get that done. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is a good day.
What did you say to them on the phone, sir? What did you say when they answered the phone on the other side?
I said, welcome almost home.
Countries, these so-called abductor states, from simply taking more Americans in order to get more of their prisoners home. How do you end these perverse incentives, sir?
Well, we're advising people not to go certain places. Tell them what's at risk, what's at stake.
Mr. President, there are these negotiations, and can you speak to the complexity of working with 6 countries to secure these releases?
Well, look, I'm not going to take the time now, but I'll do this later in the week. I particularly owe a great sense of gratitude to the Chancellor. The demands they're making of me required me to get some significant concessions from Germany, which they originally concluded they could not do because of the person in question. But everybody stepped up. Poland stepped up, Slovenia stepped up, Turkey stepped up. And it matters to have relationships. It really does. These things matter. Pardon me?
Could this improve relations with Russia? Is there any avenue for that after this prisoner exchange deal?
As my sister might say, your lips to God's ears, man.
Did you ever speak with Vladimir Putin about this? Would you be willing to speak with Putin now directly?
I don't need to speak with Putin.
Anyway.
How did you weigh that decision of letting somebody out who sounds like that way with murder?
I got home innocent people. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Are you speaking with Erdogan or any of the leaders about this?
Say that again?
Are you speaking with President Erdogan or other leaders about this?
Yes, I've spoken to all the leaders about this.
What did you say about you?
And by the way, as a father, look, you heard me say this before. I mean it. My dad had a simple proposition. Family is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Blood of my blood, bone of my bone. I can think of nothing more consequential. I mean it sincerely. And having lost family, not a different way, and not knowing what's happening, the circumstance when they're accidental, health, it matters.
Mr. President, what did Germany ask for in response for their cooperation?
Nothing.
President
President Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now?
former president.
Why didn't he do it when he was president?
Sir, what did you
You heard those remarks there from President Biden, surrounded by family members of the 4 Americans now released from Russian custody, set to be on their way home shortly. You heard the president saying that they are set to be wheels up soon. And his message on the phone when he spoke with them, along with their families, was welcome almost home. The president describing, as he put it, a feat of diplomacy and friendship, saying their brutal ordeal is over. I want to bring in our NBC News chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons. And Keir, there was a lot there. Headlines, of course, from President Biden. And those emotional moments as he was surrounded there in the state dining room by family members of those now free.
That's right. And this is a moment where families will be breathing out, where colleagues of Evan Gershkovich will be breathing out. Brutal, the president described it as. And Evan Gershkovich was held at the Fortovo prison in Moscow. That is the FSB prison. The stories from inside of there are chilling. And so I think we will hear about just how challenging it has been. We have seen Evan Gershkovich in courtrooms in Russia, in a Moscow courtroom, in a courtroom in Ekaterinburg, and he looked as if he was holding out. But it is really difficult to put into words the kind of experience that he just went through and that the others just went through. Just on that, though, Ali, too, that was one of the moments when we got an inkling that maybe something was happening, because just before the Olympics began, Evan Gershkovich was suddenly brought into court and was convicted and sentenced. And that seemed to be a sign, because the Russians, and frankly, what we're talking about here is President Putin, by what we've seen in the past, want to see the legal process finished before they agree to a swap like this. Another thing that might be worth just noting at this stage, this has been a long process, and it does look as if that this exchange was supposed to include Alexei Navalny, and that in the end it didn't, because he died. And as I had mentioned, when I questioned President Putin about that back in March, about Evan Gershkovich and asking when he was going to be released, he made news and said that, and you have to take everything that Putin says with a pinch of salt, but he claimed that he had agreed for Navalny to be released, and that then he had died in that prison. I mean, there's so much you could say about that, but it does, I think, indicate again, and it's not surprising, is it, given the complexity of all this, that this has been an extremely challenging, difficult diplomatic operation to get to this stage. And we're getting multiple statements from governments, including the German government, frankly, in diplomatic language, indicating just how challenging it was to make a decision like this. So there are going to be lots of questions looking ahead, but for now, celebrations for those families you saw there with the president.
Incredible celebrations. You mentioned, of course, the role of all of these leaders here. President Biden mentioned that he did speak with the other leaders involved, Germany, Slovenia, Norway, Poland, Turkey, etc. But when asked if he was going to speak with Vladimir Putin or if that was on the agenda anytime soon, he said, I don't need to speak with Putin, which is an indication here of what you and I have been talking about, that this, as the White House has been saying consistently since we received word of this prisoner swap, this should not be perceived as a thawing of the relationship between Moscow and Washington.
No, I don't think so. What I do think is that the Russians have been, if you like, perhaps this isn't quite the perfect way to put it, but effectively they have been collecting people in order to be able to have this moment. And why is that? Well, if you just take, for example, someone who has been released just in this prisoner exchange, Vadim Krasikov, and this is why the Germans are struggling with this, or have been struggling with this. Krasikov is somebody who was in a German prison for assassination. I mean, he was in prison for murder. He has now been released and sent back to Russia. He is somebody that President Putin has described as a patriot, and described what he did in Germany as liquidating a bandit. So what that tells you is that, I think, is that, as ever with Russia, what President Putin wants matters hugely. And if what he told me in March at that news conference really is true, again, you never know, But if it is true that he agreed to the release of Alexei Navalny, then effectively at that point he had agreed that he wanted something like this to happen, and the wheels will have started turning. I think that might answer some of the questions about why this is happening now, because inevitably back there in the US it will have domestic political implications. We don't know fully what they will be, of course. Just keep in mind, and I think it's worth noting as we report this out through the day today, just continually, I think it's worth noting that Mark Fogel, Kesnia Karolina, both of them are not released right now, and their families will be desperately unhappy about that. Inevitably, Paul Whelan, his family was deeply unhappy when Brittany Griner was released, and he wasn't. So these are bittersweet moments, but all the same, though, for the families and for Evan Gershkovich, who, of course, is a fellow journalist, it is a moment of exhilaration and terrific optimism to see them, as we will now, to see them free.
And you saw his parents there at the White House with President Biden, along with so many of those other family members. Keir Simmons, thank you. Let's go to White House correspondent Ali Rafa, who's been following all of this. And Ali, there was also some references, of course, to the political overlay here. You heard President Biden talk about how this moment showed why allies matter and why relationships matter, which seemed to be a subtle nod to the isolationist policies that former President Trump had espoused while he was in office, and then to that very direct question from one of the reporters in the room. And President Biden did take a few questions there. He talked about why didn't former President Trump get these people out when he was in office, of course, referencing Paul Whelan, who was still detained while the former president's administration was in place.
Yeah, Hallie, you mentioned that question that he was asked, quote, President Trump has repeatedly said that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. And President Biden replied, quote, why didn't he do it when he was president? And of course, drawing attention to the fact, as you mentioned, that 2 of the 3 Americans released today were imprisoned, wrongfully detained during the Trump presidency. And you heard the president talk about when these efforts began, saying that he directed his diplomatic team even before he took office, when he was president-elect, to start engaging in these diplomatic talks, to be able to have this news today, this successful prisoner swap start, all these diplomatic conversations, also praising the work of that team that's really fanned out across the globe to be able to get to this news we have today. And you heard him specifically mention all of the countries involved in this today, talking about Poland, Slovenia, Norway, Turkey, and specifically Germany, and the work of German Chancellor Scholz and what the concessions that Germany made in getting this deal across the finish line. He said all of them joined this effort, quote, at his request, and he has personally thanked the leaders of those countries. He said that all of them, quote, stepped up and stood with us. All of them made bold and brave decisions, and reiterating, saying anyone who questions whether allies matter, he says they do, especially in times of great consequence like this. And you've heard the president for years now talk about his decades-long relationships with some of these world leaders, tout his experience as a senator for more than 35 years dealing with foreign policy issues. And again, during this extremely momentous moment, this historic moment, talking about the importance of those alliances, of those friendships. You saw the president flanked by 11 family members of these 3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder, addressing the nation, and again, giving credit to those countries that are still involved in this process. Of course, he said that these wrongfully imprisoned Americans that are now leaving will be home on U.S. soil in just a few hours, when, of course, they're expected to start that incredibly difficult process of now reacclimating to life, not in prison, Hallie.
Ali Rafa, thank you very much. Our Pentagon correspondent, Courtney Cubie, is also with us. And Courtney, this was a massive feat of the national security apparatus for the United States. We understand that many of these negotiations were led in part by the CIA and intelligence officials working to get to this moment that the president is referring to. He suggested that he mentioned Andrews, I think, which seems to suggest that this plane will land at Joint Base Andrews. The family members obviously here in Washington. So still more key moments to come throughout the course of the day and night.
Yeah, and I imagine, Hallie, there won't be a dry eye at that event at Andrews whenever that does occur, with the family members being here. But I was struck by a couple of things the president said. One was, you mentioned that what really was a U.S. government, an entire U.S. government effort to try to make these negotiations happen. But I was struck by President Biden referring to tough calls that had to be made and then thanking the chancellor. So what I took that to mean was he was talking about Vadim Krasikov. This is someone who has been held. He was an FSB agent. He was known as someone who was an executor. He would kill people. He was a criminal, and he's been held by the German government. He is someone who Vladimir Putin has wanted to get back on Russian soil for some time. But the German government has rejected that idea. President Biden directly thanking German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in his remarks today, because as we have now learned, he was really the linchpin. He was the final domino that fell that allowed this entire prisoner swap to move forward, was getting Vadim Krasikov out of a German prison and back onto Russian soil. That was why Vladimir Putin allowed for this larger swap to go forward. But I was also very surprised in the question and answer, the brief question and answer after the president's remarks. He was asked about U.S. and Russian relations. Now, a senior administration official told our colleagues, Hallie, that we should not read too much into what has occurred here, this historic swap today, as being an indicator that U.S. and Russian relations are going to suddenly be on a better footing. The official pointing out specifically Russia's continued war in Ukraine, the growing Russian relationship on a military and even an economic level with the Chinese government, with North Korea, with Iran, those nations providing, in some cases, lethal and in other cases, non-lethal assistance to Russia that has made its way to the battlefield in Ukraine, in some cases even really being a game changer on the ground in Ukraine for Russia. So the senior administration officials saying, look, don't read too much into this deal as there's going to be a change. And we heard from President Biden when he was asked about that. He said, well, from your lips to God's ears. And he said he did not need to speak to Vladimir Putin going forward. So that seems to really reinforce what we heard from the senior administration official, that, again, despite the fact that there have been these years now of negotiations on this prisoner swap, it doesn't seem like it's going to indicate a change in the U.S.-Russia relationship, Hallie.
Courtney Kube, we're glad to have your expertise and your reporting with us here on this significant day in Washington and beyond. Thank you, and thanks to all of you for watching our special coverage here on NBC News Now. We'll have more on NBCNews.com and, of course, tonight on Nightly News. For all of us here, I'm Hallie Jackson. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.